No one would ever choose you, she mocked at the ball. Alpha King walked straight past everyone, and the moonlit kingdom shimmered under the cold light of a silver moon. Its grand palace rose like a crown over the city, tall towers piercing the night sky, windows glowing with golden warmth. Tonight, the palace was alive with whispers, silk rustling, and laughter. The royal ball was in full bloom, a night of glittering gowns, sparkling jewels, and whispered rivalries. Yet beneath the elegance and grandeur, a strange tension lingered, like the calm before a storm. Lady Alara moved through the crowd, her dark hair tied simply, her eyes sharp. She was not like the other nobles. Her dress, though beautiful, was modest compared to the elaborate gowns around her. Some whispered about her ancestry, about the old curse that seemed to cling to her family. Others said she was clever, dangerous in her wit, and not afraid to speak what others only dared to think. Tonight she had come prepared to observe, to listen, and, if the moment arose, to strike with words as sharp as daggers. The ballroom sparkled with candlelight and crystal chandeliers. Nobles laughed and danced, moving with an elegance that masked the games they played. Alliances were formed and broken with a glance. Servants carried trays of golden goblets, and musicians played a haunting melody that wound through the crowd, soft yet persistent, like a secret calling. Elara watched from a quiet corner, her eyes scanning the room. There he was, King Kalen. The Alpha King, they called him? His presence was magnetic, yet frightening. Rumors painted him as untouchable, ruthless, a man whose anger could level mountains and whose judgment could ruin the proudest families. Even so, there was a quiet power in his movements, a calm that made people step aside, uncertain whether to bow or flee. His dark hair fell lightly over his forehead, and his eyes, sharp and golden, seemed to see beyond the walls of the palace, beyond the masks everyone wore. Elara had heard the stories. She had heard how he punished those who betrayed him. She had also heard how he never chose a companion, never allowed anyone close to his heart. And yet, a strange flutter of curiosity stirred inside her. Tonight, she would see him. Not just from afar, but close. The nobles were loud. Too loud. They gossiped about everyone, the queen's dresses, the duke's wealth, the scandal that no one dared speak of in daylight. Elara moved with quiet grace, letting her eyes settle on Kalen as he walked into the room. The crowd seemed to part for him, yet none dared to meet his gaze. Their whispers hushed, like a sudden winter wind blowing through the halls. Kalen's eyes found hers almost immediately. There was no smile, no arrogance. Just recognition, a pause, as though he had been searching for her in the shadows of the palace all along. Elara felt her pulse quicken. The moment was interrupted by a voice dripping with malice. A young noblewoman, pale and delicate, laughed at Elara. "No one would ever choose you," she said, loud enough for half the room to hear. Her words were cruel, meant to sting, to humiliate. But Elara did not flinch. Instead, she turned. A slow, deliberate smile curling across her lips. The noblewoman laughed again, but her voice faltered as Kalen stopped in the middle of the ballroom. All eyes turned. The Alpha King, who had ignored every courtly smile and bowed greeting, had stopped. He walked straight past the nobles who had gathered around him, straight toward Elara. The air seemed to grow colder as he approached. Each step was precise, deliberate. The music continued, but the notes seemed to fade into a distant echo. Murmurs ran through the room. No one had ever seen him approach a woman so boldly, so without hesitation. Kalen stopped just a few feet away from Elara. His gaze held hers, and for a moment the world narrowed to nothing but the two of them. Her heart pounded, yet she forced herself to stand tall, to meet his gaze without fear. "You spoke boldly," Kalen said, his voice low, smooth, and commanding, carrying through the quiet. "And yet, I am here." A mixture of surprise and curiosity surged through her. "You chose to come to me?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Kalen's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile, one that did not reach his eyes entirely but suggested a spark of amusement. "Perhaps I would," he said. The words were quiet, yet they carried weight, a force that made her pulse quicken and the room fade around her. A hush fell over the ballroom. The nobles whispered, shocked. Some dared to glance at Kalen, wondering why he ignored everyone else. Others looked at Elara, who had always been the subject of ridicule and gossip. Now, all eyes were on her. Elara felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement. There was danger in his gaze, yes, but also a curiosity she had never encountered. She wanted to laugh, to run, to challenge him with words that could wound or amuse, but she held herself still. "Why me?" she finally asked, her voice soft, almost a whisper. Kalen's eyes did not waver. "Because you speak truth, even when it cuts," he replied. There was no anger in his voice, only honesty, and in that honesty lay a strange vulnerability. The noblewoman who had mocked her moments before paled, stepping back. Even the other nobles seemed unsure of how to act. No one had ever seen the Alpha King speak to a woman like this, not in public, not in a court that thrived on appearances and etiquette. Elara studied him, sensing layers beneath the surface. There was a weight to him, a shadow that clung to his presence. He carried not just power, but a history of pain and solitude. The kind of solitude that no laughter, no jewels, no titles could reach. "You are brave to mock me," Kalen said suddenly, a note of challenge in his voice. "Most are wise enough to stay silent." Elara's lips curved into a small, confident smile. "And yet I did not fear you," she said. "Perhaps you should wonder why." Kalen tilted his head slightly, intrigued. He had rarely encountered someone who met his gaze with such courage, such calm. The court whispered, the music played, yet for that moment, time seemed to bend around them. "You are unlike anyone I have met," he said. It was not a compliment. It was an observation, sharp and precise, like a blade. Yet beneath it, there was something else, something that hinted at curiosity, at interest, at recognition. Elara's heart beat faster. She felt it in her chest, the unspoken tension, the dangerous allure of someone who could destroy her with a word yet chose not to. She wanted to retreat, yet she also wanted to see how far this went, how far he would go. "Do not think that your bold words can save you," Kalen said, his voice softer now, almost a whisper meant only for her. "Or that you will escape the shadows that follow me." Elara felt a shiver run down her spine. Everyone spoke of the curse that haunted Kalen, the darkness that clung to him like a second skin. She had heard the stories, but standing here, under his gaze, the stories felt alive. They were not just tales, they were warnings. "And yet," she said quietly, "here I stand, unafraid." Then, as if satisfied or amused by her audacity, he nodded once. "We shall see how long that courage lasts," he said, and with that, he turned and walked back through the ballroom. The nobles whispered once more. Some stared at him with awe, others with envy. Elara remained still, her mind racing. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with anticipation. Something had begun tonight, something dangerous and irresistible. She could not know what the night would bring. But for the first time, she felt the thrill of standing face to face with power, of challenging a king who seemed untouchable, and of glimpsing a spark of something deeper beneath his cold, golden eyes. The ball continued, the music winding through the palace, the candles flickering like silent witnesses. Yet Elara could not focus on dancing, on gossip, or on the laughter around her. Her thoughts were only of him, the Alpha King, the man who had walked straight past everyone and stopped at her. And in the quiet of her heart, a question burned, one that no amount of courage could answer yet. Why did he choose her? The next morning, the palace seemed quieter than usual. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, painting patterns on marble floors, but the shadows of the night lingered like whispered secrets. Lady Elara sat in the small, sunlit library, her thoughts a tangle of curiosity and unease. She could not forget the golden gaze of King Kalen. The Alpha King, so commanding, so unyielding, yet the way he had looked at her, as if he saw not the mockery or the whispers, but something deeper, haunted her still. She traced the edges of a book with her finger, pretending to read, though her mind was far away. The nobles of the palace moved through the halls, their voices soft with polite whispers, but Elara heard none of it. All she could hear was the echo of his words. "We shall see how long that courage lasts." A soft knock at the door broke her thoughts. A servant carrying a tray of breakfast stepped inside. "Lady Elara, King Kalen requests your presence in the private gardens," the young woman said, bowing. Her pulse quickened. A summons from Kalen himself was not given lightly. Many would have trembled, but she straightened her back, her eyes sharp. "Tell him I will come," she said. The gardens were vast, stretching behind the palace like a forest of gold and green. Flowers in every color bloomed under the morning sun, yet a strange mist clung to the edges, as if the land itself held its breath. Kalen stood at the far end of a marble fountain, his dark coat catching the light, his golden eyes fixed on her. "Lady Elara," he said as she approached, his voice steady, but with an edge that made her heartbeat quicken. "You walked boldly last night. Few would dare to meet my gaze, and fewer would remain standing after." Elara met his gaze, her lips curling into a faint smile. "And yet I did not fall," she said. "I am still here." Kalen's eyes narrowed slightly, studying her. "Do you understand what it means to be close to me?" he asked. His voice softened, carrying a weight that went beyond warning. "There are shadows that follow me, Shadows that touch everyone I care for. Some call it a curse, others call it fate. But you, Lady Alara, are not like the others. You speak truths even when they wound, and that intrigues me. Alara felt a chill. The stories had not lied. There was a darkness to him, an invisible force that could touch those around him. And yet, standing here under the sun and among the flowers, she did not feel fear. She felt a pull, deep and strange, like a river running through her veins. I am not afraid of shadows, she said quietly. If your curse is real, then I will face it. I will not be afraid of you. Kalen took a step closer. Courage is one thing, he said, but few realize the cost of defiance. You will see the world differently if you walk too close to me. You may see pain, sorrow, even despair. Alara did not step back. Instead, she met his gaze, unflinching. Perhaps I am already familiar with despair, she said. Perhaps it is why I can stand before you now. The corner of Kalen's mouth lifted in a shadow of a smile, though his eyes remained serious. There is fire in you, Alara, he said. Fire that refuses to bend. Fire that might survive the darkness around me, or burn itself out. Alara's lips pressed together, a mixture of pride and caution. She did not want to reveal her own past, the nights of loneliness, the whisper of loss that followed her like a shadow. But Kalen did not seem to need her words. He seemed to see everything in the angles of her face, in the steady line of her jaw, in the courage that shone in her eyes. For a long silence, they stood in the garden. The fountain bubbled quietly, the wind rustled leaves, and the mist shifted like soft ghosts around their feet. Then Kalen spoke again, his voice low and deliberate. There is a place you must see, he said. A place that holds the history of my curse. And perhaps the secret to its end. But it is not safe for someone unprepared. If you come, you must trust me fully. Do you understand? Alara hesitated, her mind racing. She did not know what awaited her, but a strange certainty filled her chest. I will come, she said finally. If there is a chance to understand, I will follow. Kalen's gaze softened for a fraction of a second, something rare, fleeting, almost human. Then the mask of the Alpha King returned, sharp and controlled. Prepare yourself, he said. You may not recognize what you see. Alara wandered the palace halls, her eyes on shadows and doors, listening to whispers of servants and nobles. She learned more of Kalen's history than most would dare, tales of battles long past, of kings who fell to betrayal, of a queen who had cursed him with shadows of sorrow, and always she returned to the garden, where Kalen waited, silent and observant, watching her grow more confident in her courage. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the towers, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and violet, Kalen led her through a hidden corridor of the palace. The walls were lined with portraits of kings and queens long gone, their eyes seeming to follow their steps. Candles flickered, casting dancing shadows across the stone floor. This way, Kalen said, his voice low, guiding her to a staircase that led downward into the heart of the palace. The air grew colder, heavier, filled with the scent of old stone and distant incense. At the bottom of the stairs, a door stood carved with symbols she did not recognize. Kalen pressed his hand to the center of the door, and it swung open silently, revealing a chamber unlike any she had seen. The room was dark, filled with faint, floating lights that hovered like will-o'-the-wisps. In the center stood a mirror framed in black iron, and as Alara approached, she saw not her reflection, but shadows moving within its glass, twisting and shifting as if alive. "Look closely," Kalen said, his voice echoing softly. "This is the truth of my curse. Every person I care for touches these shadows. They follow, they linger, they never leave completely. Most run, most falter, but some survive." Alara shivered as she studied the mirror. The shadows twisted into faces she almost recognized, faces of people lost to time, to betrayal, to pain. They whispered faint and haunting, carrying echoes of sorrow that seemed to reach through her chest. "Can it be broken?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Kylan's eyes met hers, steady and piercing. "Perhaps, but breaking it is dangerous. Some sacrifices may be required, choices that could change everything. That is why I warned you. That is why few dare to come close." Elara's heart pounded. Fear rose in her, but alongside it, something stronger, a desire to understand, to face the darkness, to stand with him, not behind or away. "I am not afraid," she said again, louder this time. "If there is a way, I will face it." Ooh. Kalen studied her in silence. Then, slowly, he stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder, not touching her fully, but close enough that warmth and shadow seemed to mingle between them. "You are brave," he said quietly, "more than anyone I have ever known. But bravery alone will not be enough. You must also be strong, and your heart must be ready." Alara felt a strange rush, a mixture of fear and something else, something she could not name. It was a pull, deep and magnetic, pulling her closer to the man who had walked past everyone at the ball, who had challenged her courage and held a shadow over all he touched. For a moment, she felt the weight of history, of curses, of shadows that stretched across centuries. And yet, she did not falter. She met his gaze, unflinching. "Then I am ready," she said. Kalen nodded once, a rare, brief softness crossing his face. "Very well," he said. "The journey begins tomorrow. Be prepared, Alara. The shadows are patient, and they do not forgive." As she left the chamber, the whispers of shadows seemed to follow her, winding around her feet, brushing against her thoughts. But she did not look back. She would face whatever darkness awaited. For the first time in her life, she did not feel small, unseen, or powerless. And in the quiet of the palace where candles flickered and the night whispered of secrets, Kalen watched her leave, his thoughts heavy, but his heart unsettled. For Alara had survived the first test of courage, and the Alpha King knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The night was quiet, yet the shadows moved, restless. And somewhere deep in the heart of the palace, A secret waited, ready to challenge them both, testing courage, trust, and the fragile threads of something dangerous, irresistible, and true. The morning fog clung to the palace gardens as Lady Alara followed King Caelan through the hidden corridors of the palace. The walls, lined with ancient tapestries, seemed to close in around them, shadows twisting as if alive. Each step took them farther from the warmth of sunlight and into a world both unfamiliar and uneasy. The air was cooler here, carrying the scent of stone, moss, and old secrets. "Where are we going?" Alara asked, her voice steady, though a faint tremor of excitement and fear ran through her. Caelan did not answer immediately. He walked silently, his long coat brushing the floor, his golden eyes fixed ahead. Finally he spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "To the forest beyond the palace. A place the sun barely touches. There, you will see the truth of what I carry, and perhaps the path to its end." Alara followed, gripping the edge of her cloak. She had imagined many journeys with him, but never one like this, through corridors unknown, into lands whispered about in fearful tales. Her heart raced, yet she felt no hesitation. This was her choice, her courage, and she would not falter. The palace gates opened into the morning mist, revealing a forest unlike any she had seen. Trees, twisted and tall, reached toward the sky like hands grasping for light. Their branches tangled, casting dark patterns across the ground. The air smelled of damp earth and wildflowers, but beneath it lingered something older, something that whispered of shadows. Caelan led her along a narrow path, silent except for the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. Occasionally a bird's cry echoed through the forest, distant and haunting. Alara felt a shiver, not from cold, but from the sense that this forest was alive, not with animals, but with memories, echoes of the past, and the lingering power of the curse that bound Caelan. "You must understand," Caelan said finally, breaking the silence. "This place tests more than courage. It tests the heart, the mind, and the will. Many have entered and faltered, drawn into their own fears and shadows. Few leave unchanged." Elara's gaze met his. "I have already faced fear before," she said, "and I am not afraid now." Caelan studied her, a mixture of surprise and admiration in his eyes. "Your bravery is rare," he said quietly. "But bravery alone is not enough. The shadows, they are patient, and they will try to find weakness." They continued deeper into the forest, where the mist thickened and the sunlight struggled to penetrate. Soon the path became narrower, the trees growing closer, their branches brushing against them like the fingers of unseen spirits. Alara felt the pull of the forest, a strange magnetic force that seemed to tug at her thoughts. Images flashed in her mind, faces of people lost, whispers of sorrow, glimpses of danger. She stumbled slightly, and Caelan caught her arm. His touch was firm but gentle, steadying her. "Do not falter," he said. "Control your mind. The shadows feed on fear." Alara nodded, taking a deep breath. She felt the pulse of the forest, the weight of the shadows pressing around them, yet she refused to yield. She would not run. She would not falter. After hours of walking, they reached a clearing. At its center was a stone pedestal, carved with symbols that glowed faintly in the mist. Upon it rested a crystal orb, shimmering with shifting shadows inside. The air around it vibrated with power, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. "This is the heart of the curse," Kalen said, his voice echoing through the clearing. "Here lies the source of the shadows that follow me, and if you are to help break it, you must confront what it shows you." Shadows moved within it, forming shapes, some human, some twisted, all whispering faintly. She felt the pull of their sorrow, their fear, and her own heart clenched. These were not mere illusions. These were echoes of pain, fragments of lives lost to betrayal, loneliness, and darkness. "Do not touch it," Kalen warned. "The orb does not forgive. It shows what you fear most, and it will try to trap you in it." She did not reach for it, but she did not step back either. Instead, she met Kalen's gaze. "Then I will face it," she said. "Whatever it shows me, I will not let it control me." Kalen studied her, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Few had the courage to confront the orb willingly. Most had recoiled, overwhelmed by visions of their deepest fears. Yet Alara's resolve seemed to hold steady even as the mist thickened around them. "Very well," Kalen said. "We begin." He stepped forward and touched the orb lightly. Shadows swirled violently, forming images that filled the clearing. Battles, betrayals, faces of kings and queens long gone. A shadowy version of Kalen appeared, twisted and sorrowful, his eyes filled with rage and loneliness. He moved toward Elora, silent and relentless, until she felt as if the shadows themselves were reaching for her heart. Elara's breath caught, but she did not move. She forced herself to focus, to hold her mind steady. She remembered Kalen's words. "The shadows feed on fear." She would not give them that power. "Kalen," she whispered, her voice steady, though her heart raced. "I am not afraid." The shadow stopped, its form flickering. Kalen reached for her hand, and she took it without hesitation. Together they stood, facing the darkness. The shadows writhed and hissed, trying to pull at her thoughts, trying to tempt her with visions of doubt and despair. And then something shifted. The shadows recoiled slightly, as if sensing the strength of their bond. Kalen's golden eyes met hers, steady and unwavering, and she felt a warmth, a light that pushed back the darkness. "You are stronger than I thought," Kalen said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Stronger than anyone I have known." Elara felt a strange surge of hope. She realized that the shadows were not just about fear. They were about loneliness, about the pain Kalen had carried for years, and perhaps together they could overcome it. Hours passed in the clearing, the orb pulsing with power. Elara faced visions of her own past, loss, betrayal, moments of despair, but she held fast, drawing strength from Kalen's presence. He never let go of her hand, never let her falter, and with each moment the shadows weakened, flickering like dying embers in the night. Finally the orb's light dimmed, and the clearing fell silent. The mist receded, and the forest seemed less threatening, the trees standing tall and calm, as if the darkness had been lifted, at least for now. Elora breathed deeply, her chest heaving. She had faced the heart of the curse, and she had not broken. Kalen released her hand, but his gaze remained fixed on her. You have done what few could, he said quietly. But this is only the beginning. The shadows will return, stronger and more cunning. And you will be tested again. Elara met his gaze, unwavering. Then I will be ready, she said. Whatever comes, I will face it. With you. Kylan studied her for a long moment. Then a faint smile crossed his face, rare and fleeting, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. You are remarkable, Elara, he said. And dangerous. I should have expected nothing less. For a moment, the tension between them eased, replaced by a fragile sense of trust, of understanding. Yet even as they prepared to leave the clearing, Elara felt a pull, a whisper in the air that reminded her. The shadows were patient. They did not forgive. And this journey had only begun. As they walked back through the forest, the mist curling around their feet, Elara realized something profound. The danger they faced was not just in the shadows, or in the orb, or in Kalen's curse. The danger was in the bond growing between them, the connection that could bring strength, but also risk. She did not know where this path would lead. She did not know what trials awaited. But she knew one thing with certainty. She would not turn back. She would not falter. And in the quiet of the forest, where shadows still lingered but no longer pressed too close, Kalen walked beside her, aware that the woman he had chosen to trust, and perhaps even care for, was unlike anyone he had ever known. And that realization, both terrifying and exhilarating, left him wondering if he had finally found someone who could survive the darkness and perhaps even tame it. The forest whispered around them, carrying promises of trials yet to come, dangers yet unseen, and a bond that would be tested in fire and shadow. And somewhere, deep within the shadows, a faint echo laughed, a reminder that this story, their story, was far from over. The night fell over the moonlit kingdom like a velvet curtain, and the palace seemed smaller, quieter, almost waiting. Lady Elara and King Kalen stood at the edge of the cursed forest, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and mist. Behind them, the path they had traveled wound like a silver ribbon into shadow. Ahead, the deeper darkness of the forest promised trials yet unknown. Kalen's golden eyes glimmered in the dim light, reflecting the uncertainty and danger that awaited them. "This is where the shadows grow strongest," he said, his voice low and steady. "Beyond this point, nothing is as it seems. The curse feeds on fear and doubt, twisting what you hold closest to your heart." Elara's fingers tightened around the edge of her cloak. "Then we step forward together," she said. "Whatever waits, we will face it as one." Kalen's gaze softened, though just for a moment. "Few dare to speak with such certainty," he murmured. "Most would flee before seeing the truth." Shadows stretched long and twisted, moving as though alive. Each step seemed to echo, each rustle of leaves carrying whispers of despair. Elara felt her heart pound, yet she did not falter. She kept her eyes on Kalen, drawing strength from his presence, even as the forest seemed determined to separate them. Ahead, the path opened into a circular clearing bathed in faint silver light. In the center stood the spectral figure of a woman, her eyes cold, her hair flowing like smoke. This was the source of the curse, The queen who had once betrayed Kaelin, whose malice had bound shadows to him for decades. She regarded them silently, her gaze sharp and unforgiving. "You dare return?" the queen hissed, her voice like ice. "After all these years, you bring a companion? A mortal to face what kings cannot endure?" Kaelin stepped forward, his stance protective. "I bring someone who is neither mortal nor weak. She is brave, and she will see what you cannot break." Elara met the queen's gaze steadily. "I will not be afraid of shadows," she said. "I will not be moved by lies or fear." The queen laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. Shadows erupted from the ground, forming into grotesque shapes, twisting faces and writhing hands. They lunged toward them, hissing and whispering doubts, each one a fragment of Kaelin's curse, each one feeding on the fear within their hearts. Kaelin drew his sword, a blade dark and gleaming, etched with runes of protection. The shadows recoiled slightly at the sight. But the queen only smiled, as though enjoying their struggle. Elara stood firm, her hands rising slightly. She remembered the lessons of the orb, the tests in the misty clearing. Courage alone would not be enough. She needed focus, trust, and a heart strong enough to resist the pull of fear. She stepped forward, chanting softly words that seemed to rise from her very soul. The shadows twisted toward her, trying to reach inside, but she held them back, forming a barrier of light from her will alone. Kaelin fought beside her, moving with precision and strength, cutting through shadows that lunged toward them. Yet even his blade could not destroy the curse entirely. Only Elara's presence, her unwavering courage, allowed them to survive the assault. The queen's laughter turned sharp, almost a scream. "Do you think a mortal can undo centuries of pain?" she demanded. "Do you think you can touch a king's curse and survive?" "I am not just mortal. I'm here, and I will not leave until this ends. You do not control me. You do not control him." Kaelin's eyes met hers, golden and fierce. For the first time, he lowered his sword, trusting her entirely. "Do it," he said. "I cannot fight this alone." Elara stepped closer to the queen, raising her hands toward the shadows that surrounded them. She focused on the bond between herself and Kaelin, the trust they had built, the courage they had shared. Slowly, the shadows began to falter, drawn not by fear but by something stronger: connection, light, and truth. The queen shrieked, a sound of rage and frustration, as the shadows dissipated like smoke in the wind. Elara felt a sudden pull in her chest, a test of her strength. The shadows tried to reach her heart, whispering her fears, her doubts, the pain of her past. She remembered the nights she had been alone, the mockery she had faced, the loneliness that had shaped her. She faced it all. Her voice rose in defiance, echoing through the forest. "I am not afraid. I am not alone, and I will not be broken." A sudden light burst from her chest, spreading outward, washing over the shadows. They writhed and twisted, then vanished, leaving the forest calm, the silver mist receding. The queen herself screamed, then dissolved into nothingness, leaving only the wind and the quiet. Kaelin dropped to his knees, exhausted but free of the oppressive darkness that had bound him for so long. Elara knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It is done," she whispered. The curse is broken. Kalen looked at her, his eyes shining with a mixture of relief and something softer, something unspoken. You saved me, he said. You faced what I could not alone. You are unlike anyone I have ever known. Elara smiled faintly, though her chest still heaved from the effort. We faced it together, she said. It was never only your burden. They stood in silence, the forest around them serene, peaceful for the first time in decades. The shadows had vanished, leaving only light and the quiet murmur of wind through the trees. When they returned to the palace, the night was calm, and the moon hung low, casting silver light over the towers. The nobles whispered as they passed, sensing the change in the air. Kalen's eyes no longer carried the weight of the curse. His presence was still commanding, but softened by trust, by connection, by the bond he had forged with Elara. The king and the lady walked to the garden where their journey had begun. The fountain bubbled quietly, reflecting the moonlight. Kalen turned to Elara, his expression serious but gentle. You could have left, he said. Most would have. Few would have stayed, and yet you stood by me even when the shadows threatened to take everything. Elar met his gaze. Because I chose to, she said simply. Because I believed in you. And, in us. Kalen reached out, taking her hand. The warmth of his touch was comforting, grounding, a promise of protection and partnership. Then we choose each other, he said. Not because of duty, not because of fear, but because we will it. Elara felt a rush of relief and joy mingled with a quiet understanding of the road they had traveled together. The trials, the shadows, the fear, they had faced it all and emerged stronger. For the first time, Kalen allowed himself to smile fully, a rare, genuine lightness that touched even his golden eyes. I was wrong to believe that no one could stand with me, he admitted softly. I see now. Some can, and some do more than survive. Some transform everything. Elara squeezed his hand. Then we move forward together, she said. No shadows, no curses, no fear. Only us. They stood there in silence for a moment, the fountain's water reflecting the moonlight, the palace quiet around them. For the first time, neither Kalen nor Elara felt the weight of history pressing on their shoulders. The curse had ended, the shadows had vanished, and the bond they had forged would endure. Yet even in this moment of peace, there was a sense that life would continue to test them. The world beyond the palace walls was vast and unpredictable. Alliances would form, rivals would plot, and challenges would arise. But they had learned something essential. Together, they could face whatever came. Together, they were stronger than any shadow, any curse, any fear. Elara leaned into Kalen, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. We did it, she whispered. Yes, he replied, his voice soft but steady. Together. And we will continue to do so, for as long as we live. The moon cast its silver glow over the palace and the garden, painting the world in light and shadow, reminding them that darkness could exist, but so could courage, trust, and love. And in that quiet night, King Kalen and Lady Elara chose to face the future, not as king and subject, not as ruler and noble, but as equals, bound by shared trials, respect, and a connection forged in fire and shadow. The wind rustled through the leaves, carrying with it a promise. The story was far from over, but the shadows of the past had been conquered, and the path ahead was theirs to walk, side by side.